Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm doing my top 10 books for 2024 and I had a interesting reading year. I felt like I started off strong and I kind of like lost interest in reading a little bit because I just wasn't picking up a lot of really great books in the middle and I wasn't even sure if I was going to hit my goal of 52 books per year, which is my usual goal, which is averages to a book a week. But at the end, I again fell in love with reading, got a lot of good books, and I was able to actually surpass my goal of 57 books for the year. So today I'm sharing my top 10. I just also want to say that I could not have gotten through my 57 books without my book clubs. I am so fortunate to be part of 3 book clubs and we read a book a month, so that already puts me at 36. So I just personally really have to read like 16 books on my own to fulfill my goal of 50 books a year. And yeah, it's just really great because with book clubs, I get suggested books that I normally wouldn't gravitate towards, that I discover that I actually enjoy. And also, it's also nice when I find a book that I do like to share with them and we all just really enjoy it. Or there's a book that I love and having someone else in my book club totally trash it, it's just very humbling. So yeah, I think if you have the opportunity to join a book club in your town or maybe even an online one, it's a great way to, I don't know, just get through books and read them and enjoy them in a different way. The first chunk of my top 10 books that I want to share is my favorite genre, you guessed it, which is historical fiction that usually spans multi-generation. So I had 5 books of my top 10 books, that's half the books of my top 10 that fell into this category. So these books, they all followed several characters through several decades, through different generations, and sometimes even spanning across different countries. So my top book of the year actually was the last or second last book I read. It was Dust Child by, I'm going to butcher your name, so I'm sorry in advance, it's Nguyen Phan Quay Mai. And this book was great. It's set in Vietnam during the Vietnam War and also spans into 2006, I believe, and kind of covers the stories of Vietnamese women in the rural countryside during the war, how they were impacted, how they came to the big city, Saigon, how they interacted with the American GIs, the American like army guys, and how the consequences of these relationships, you know, having children that were abandoned in Vietnam or being adopted in America, how these children grew up and tried to look for some answer to who made them, who their parents were. This book was just really great. It was a bit too short, but still awesome. Another book was Four Treasures of the Sky by Jenny Tinghui Zhang. And this book was very interesting because it was set in Idaho in America during not the gold rush, I don't think, but maybe around that time in the late 1800s era that I never have really read about. And it talks about this girl in China who finds her way to America and basically talks about how she works in like these brothel houses, I think in San Francisco, and it made her way to Idaho, and how she interacted with the people there. This book was really sad and kind of talking about the small town in Idaho and how the local Americans interacted with the immigrant Chinese people, and just how, you know, there's obviously a lot of racism, but also a lot of Americans that didn't care that these people were Chinese. And it was just a really great but really sad book. Other book was Hotline by Dimitri Nasrallah. And this book was really short, but it was really great. It was set in Montreal, and I believe it talked about a Lebanese immigrant that came to Canada in Montreal with her son. And this talks about that relationship and how she had to work on like a call center, kind of like not shilling, but kind of like selling these supplements that weren't that legit. And it was just a great book about this woman and her experience in Canada and the racism that she dealt with when she was an immigrant here. Another book was Hello Beautiful by Napolitano. And this book, I believe, is purely fiction. The 3 previous books I mentioned were set in a bit of like, were either based on real people or based on historical events. Hello Beautiful just follows a family. And the reason why I put it in historical fiction is it does allude to like real events that happen, but it's not like the focus of the story. But it does follow a family for multi-generations. I don't really remember exactly what this book was about, so I'm gonna like mess it up. I just remember it followed this family that had like 4 sisters, and there was a plot of one of the sisters fall in love with this guy, and he was a basketball player, and basically it follows their love story, but these sisters are always kind of like prevalent in their lives. And I just remember how it followed several decades and how it all kind of came together, and it just really showed how life is very nuanced. It's not always black and white, and I just really loved it. Other one was Don't Forget to Write by Sara Goodman Confino. This one was super interesting. It was set in, I think, the 50s or 60s, and it talked about this young Jewish girl who was sent to live with her grandma, and her grandma was just kind of this like single older lady who was just having a really good life. And it talked about this like relationship between this granddaughter and this grandma, and how they really had this great summer together. And like it was just like, even if I'm explaining the plot, it's not that interesting, but the way it was written and the relationship this grandma and her daughter have was really beautiful, and I really enjoyed it. And because it's set in the 50s and 60s, it really talked about women empowerment without being too in your face, and it was just a really great book. These books I'm sharing are not in the order of like top to worst. They're all like equally top 10, except Dust Child was number 1. But the next book is, if you're in the mood for a WTF that I just read, like this book is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. And honestly, when I read it, I didn't really enjoy the writing. I didn't know what I was reading. And when the book ended, I was like, what did I just read? But why it became a top 10 was because this is the type of book that really simmers and grows on you. And like, I find myself thinking about this book like months after, because it talks about, okay, so basically the story of the book is simply, there's a couple, and they're married, I believe, and one of the couple, it goes into a deep dive sea exploration, and the submarine goes missing for months, and no one knows what happened to it, so people assume that they died, and mysteriously the submarine comes back and all people seem to be fine. So this woman returns to her wife back home, and then the wife is like taking care of her wife, who is recovering from this expedition. But this wife who went for expedition is now becoming like a sea creature, starts being addicted to water, and then the wife at the end, without spoiling it, has to do something. So when I read it, I was like, what's happening? Why is this woman becoming a sea creature? Why is she addicted to water? What happened during this like expedition? When we have no answers. But after I finished it, I think this book really talks about grief and how we deal with traumatic situations. And it was just a really beautiful book, and it just really stuck with me. So I really recommend this book to read, even if it's something that I probably won't be seeking all the time, but just once in a while, it really like, I don't know, it stuck with me. The next book is, if you're in the mood for action-filled page-turn mystery and thriller, but set in a museum with some Jurassic Park vibes, I definitely recommend Relic by Douglas Preston Lincoln Child. This book was recommended to me by a coworker who was looking for Jurassic Park to read but couldn't find a copy, and this book was always kind of like suggested with it. So this book was written in the 90s, and it was just really fun. It's basically, it felt like I was reading like a action movie in book form. Like, I didn't know what was happening. It's set in New York in a museum, and shortly, in a few weeks, there's going to be an opening of the museum where they retrieve all these like artifacts and relics from this like place in South America, and people start dying, no one knows what's happening, and you're just kind of putting the pieces together. And I really enjoyed it, so I really recommend this book if you want something that hits action, thriller, mystery, paleontology, all that kind of stuff. The next book is, if you're in the mood for a slightly dystopian book, but this also could be reality, is Our Missing Hearts by Celeste. This book was interesting because it talks about a son and mother relationship, and also talks about, I think this book was written like either like right after 2020 COVID or like during that time, and it talks about in America, basically people start being racist towards Asian people, but then the government steps in and it actually becomes like a thing, and how these people are, Asian people are ostracized. And it sounds like so far-fetched, right? Like, how could this happen? But in 2020, during the peak of Kung Flu and all that kind of stuff, it was possible. Like, there was a lot of like Asian hate and that kind of stuff happening. And you know, what if it became that the government made it normal to like hate Asians? So this book kind of talks about that, and I really enjoyed it. I was surprised that was just one book, because I feel like this could be a whole series. So I felt like the author Celeste did a really good job world building in such a short time, and I really enjoyed it. The next few books I read, this was a book that I wasn't planning to be like something that stayed in my mind, but it really did. I think because I listened to the audiobook as well. So this book was Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. If you're not familiar with him, he plays Chandler in this sitcom called Friends that lasted from the 90s to the early 2000s, like for 10 years, and it was very iconic. And he was always kind of a funny guy. And I remember when I watched the show, I remember his weight would go up and down, and people would always be like, in the 90s, and also I was a child, they would be like, oh, like he has like a drinking problem, he's going through recovery and that kind of stuff. And then if you don't know, last year he actually died in his hot tub. And people weren't sure if he died from like drugs or like that kind of stuff. And basically this book talks about, he shares his life, you know, it's a celebrity memoir. And I went in thinking he would just talk about his childhood, his adulthood, his friends' career, his movie career, and that kind of stuff. And I didn't know that he was addicted to so many substances. It wasn't just drinking. It was so many things, prescription stuff you get off the street. And like this book, even though he's talking about his whole life, I really listened to it as this book is about his addiction and he's just a side character. Like from very early on as a child, his family would prescribe him like this type of medicine that they give to kids back then to stop them from crying. I think it's like a sedative or something. And basically he was conditioned to be addicted to substances for a very young age. And it just goes to show it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, because Matthew Perry, you know, went to therapy, he went to rehab. He did so much stuff to be not addicted, but in the end of the day, like that's what drove his life. Like it was just very interesting and very eye-opening for me to listen to his experience with substances. And this book was just very sad and I don't know, it's just crazy. And the last book that hit my top 10, also at the very last moment, the 11th hour, it was The Best Laid Plans by Terry Fallis. This book is definitely not something that would ever be in my realm to read, but a coworker recommended to me. It basically talks about the Canadian political system, and it talks about, the fictional part is that someone is running for Canadian politics, doesn't want to, but wins. And then when they win, they have to be part of the system. But because they didn't grow up as a politician or had interest in it, they also have very like candid view of the political system, how it works, and all the bureaucracy. And it was just so fun to read and very eye-opening. And I think as a Canadian, I really enjoyed it. So I really recommend this book if you're a Canadian. Those were my top 10 reads for 2024. Did you read any of these books in the past? And what did you think of them? Were they also a top book or were they a snooze? And I'd love to hear what was your top books of this past year. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.